Frixion pens and markers are a very popular way to transfer designs onto fabric and hand embroidery. And here are a few of them. And so I thought we would look at them and try them out and also see if there might be any potential issues with them. So let's get started. First, this one is the ballpoint clicker. So it just has a little click. This one is a stick, but it's also a ballpoint. It just comes with a cap. This Frixion, some of the pens also come in other colors. This is a blue color I'm going to try out. This one has a point. So it's gel, just like the other ones, but the point is really, really thin up here. And then there's the Frixion markers, and these also come in different colors, but they're almost like a thin Sharpie or some other marker or Crayola marker that you might find. So how they were meant to work was they're meant to work on paper. That's how they were designed to work. So I'm just going to try it out here. So it's pretty easy to go on. So they're called Frixion because the friction on the eraser, it's not really an eraser, it's maybe a little piece of rubber up here. If you create the friction with the rubber meeting your paper, it's going to generate heat, and that heat is what makes the ink disappear. So there are some caveats to this. If this was over a year old, this might not work as well. It might not disappear. So you can see it's still kind of faintly there. I don't know if you can see with this light. But you can definitely still see the impression of the word there. But this is how they were designed to work. But hand embroiderers and crafters, being the ingenious people that we are, have taken this onto fabric. So let's try it on the fabric too. So this is just a plain white Kona cotton. So I don't have this fabric in a hoop, so I don't have a lot of, it's not really taut, so it does make it a little harder to write. But out of the other Frixion gel pen, I do find that the ballpoint is a little bit easier on fabric. So let's try the stick. This is also, it'll take a little while to get going. It's also a ballpoint. So if you run it a couple of times, it does leave a pretty dark mark. And then let's try, this one is the point, and it's obviously blue. And this one's just called point, so I'm just going to call it point here. And then the Frixion color marker. This one is much, much thicker than you can see, and it definitely leaves a bolder mark here. The only downside is if you had a really fine design, it would be harder to capture that with this marker. So we've got this on this white. I want to try it also on color. So real quickly, I'm going to mark here. So now I've got it on my plain white Kona cotton, and this is also blue cotton, and just to be complete, I'm going to do, this is a dyed light blue linen. So now I've got my markings on my white Kona cotton, my blue cotton, and this light blue linen. So let's see how well they come off. So I have my heat gun here. I'm going to, let's do one at a time so we can kind of see how they do. So. Now what's interesting about this is that the ink has gone away, but there's definitely ghosting. You can definitely still see what I had written, even though the ink itself, the black and the blue is gone. Let's try the linen. So the linen's actually held up quite well. There's really, you don't see much ghosting. The ink is gone. So the linen definitely really did a good job with the linen. With the cotton, you can still see a little of the ghosting there, like something's still there. And with the light blue, you can definitely see that something is still there. So the other thing with these is that the ink is supposed to come back when they're introduced to cold. So I'm going to put these in the freezer and see what happens. So it's been 5 minutes in the freezer, and you can see that the ink has come back. It's resurrected itself fully back on all of them. Maybe not quite as dark as it was before, but definitely, you can definitely notice it, definitely see it. After only 5 minutes. which in most cases, for most people, this won't be an issue. But if you happen to live in a colder climate, or you're mailing a gift to someone in a colder climate, keep that in mind, that these ink marks will come back. So let's shoot it with heat again and see if we can make it disappear again. So this time I'm going to rinse out these fabrics and see if rinsing that ink out for good, if that makes any difference. So let's see what happens next. And we're back. So I rinsed the fabric, dried the fabric, and then put it back in the freezer for another 10 minutes this time. And you can see with the white fabric, the markings definitely came back. Not so much with that first, the Frixion clicker, but with the other ones, it definitely came back. With the blue, it's not as noticeable. The marker definitely is coming through stronger than the others. You can see a little ghosting here. But yeah, overall the marker is the one that came through the darkest. And with the linen actually did pretty well. I think there's one little mark here from the marker that's a ghost. But otherwise, the linen held up pretty well. So I guess just to recap, we used the markers on the white cotton, the blue cotton, and the light blue linen. And it definitely does go away with heat. The only problem was with the blue fabric, there was a lot of ghosting. You could definitely still see the words on the fabric, depending on how it was hitting the light. But the other two definitely disappeared with heat. Then 5 minutes in the freezer, and they all came back. And then I rinsed them, put them in the freezer for another 5 minutes, and you can see that the white cotton, especially the fabric, the markings still came back out. The freezer, according to Pilot's website, the markings come back at 14 degrees. So the freezer is colder than that, but you can definitely see that the markings do come back in the cold, even when it's been rinsed. So just to keep that in mind when you're using the Frixion pens to transfer your designs. You know, a lot of times your embroidery may cover this up and it might not be an issue for you, but if you like to kind of draw and experiment on your fabric before you embroider, keep in mind that those marks can come back, so be careful with those. So this is my experiment on the Frixion Pilot pen.